The conference room at Morrison Industries felt suffocating. 23 shareholders sat around the mahogany table, watching my father present his expansion proposal. I sat in the back corner, exactly where I'd been sitting for the past 8 years. Quietly observing, never speaking, always dismissed. "We're looking for committed partners," Dad continued, his voice booming with the authority he'd cultivated over 30 years in manufacturing. "People who understand what it takes to build something real. This isn't a hobby. This isn't a side project for trust fund kids playing entrepreneur." His eyes swept the room, deliberately skipping over me. I was 29 years old, and to my family, I was still the warehouse worker who'd somehow talked his way into these meetings. My sister Victoria leaned back in her chair, perfectly manicured nails tapping against her leather portfolio. At 32, she was Dad's golden child. Harvard MBA, 3 years at McKinsey, now VP of Strategic Development at Morrison Industries. Everything I wasn't. "The real question," Victoria interjected smoothly, "is whether we have the capital depth to support this expansion without diluting our core investor base. We need partners who can commit to the $200 million threshold." I kept my expression neutral, years of practice making it effortless. They had no idea I'd been listening to these same presentations since I was 21, quietly building my position while they mocked my warehouse job. My brother Marcus chimed in from across the table. "We should be targeting institutional investors. Serious money. Not people who think reading a few business books makes them qualified." He glanced at me with barely concealed contempt. "Some people need to understand their limitations." I'd heard variations of this speech my entire life. At family dinners, at holidays, at every corporate event where I stood silently in the background while they networked with real business people. The irony was exquisite. After the meeting, I followed the crowd to the reception area. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over the assembled shareholders, most of whom I'd met dozens of times. None of them knew who I really was. Dad cornered me near the bar, his expression a mixture of disappointment and irritation. "Jason, we need to talk about your attendance at these meetings." "I'm a shareholder," I said simply. "I have every right to be here." "You own what, a few hundred shares? Maybe 1,000. He shook his head. "This is serious business. We're discussing $200 million in expansion capital. That's more than you'll make in your entire lifetime at that warehouse." Victoria appeared at his elbow, champagne flute in hand. "Dad's trying to be gentle, Jason. But honestly, you're embarrassing yourself. These meetings are for people who actually contribute to the company's success." "I contribute," I said quietly. Marcus laughed from behind them. "By moving boxes? Come on, little brother. Dad gave you those shares out of pity when you turned 18. Don't pretend you're actually part of this world." I looked at each of them, my father, my sister, my brother. The family that had spent 3 decades making sure I understood my place. The warehouse worker. The family charity case. The one who'd never amount to anything. "I see," I said. "So you're looking for serious investors. People who can commit $200 million. "Exactly," Dad said, relieved I was finally understanding. "This is big league stuff. You should focus on your strengths. The warehouse needs reliable people. There's no shame in that." "And if I wanted to be considered for a partnership position?" I asked. "Hypothetically." Victoria actually laughed. "Jason, a partnership position requires a minimum $50 million investment commitment. You'd need to prove you have the capital, the business acumen, and the track record. You have none of those things." "Budget table suits you better," Marcus added. "Let the adults handle the real decisions." I nodded slowly, pulling out my phone. "I understand. You need serious money. Proven investors. People with actual skin in the game." Finally, Dad muttered, "Look, son, there's nothing wrong with being realistic about your capabilities. Not everyone is cut out for high-stakes business." I opened my banking app, the one connected to my primary investment account at Sterling Capital Management. The one they'd never asked about. The one that showed a current balance of $487 million across various holdings. Morrison Industries represented my largest single position. $203.7 million invested through a series of shell companies and investment vehicles I'd been building since I was 21. "You're right," I said calmly. "I should be realistic about my capabilities." I began typing an email to my investment manager, David Chin at Sterling Capital. David had been handling my portfolio for 8 years, ever since my first tech startup exit had netted me $12 million. He'd watched that $12 million grow into nearly $500 million through careful investments, angel funding, and one particularly lucrative cryptocurrency play in 2017. Finally showing some sense, Victoria said. Maybe focus on getting promoted to supervisor at the warehouse. That's a more achievable goal. The email draft was simple. David, initiate full liquidation of all Morrison Industries positions. All holdings across entities Delta, Epsilon, and Zeta. Total withdrawal, $203.7 million. Execute immediately. Authorization code, JM7734. My finger hovered over the send button. Jason, Dad said, his tone softening slightly. I know this is hard to hear. But you'll be happier once you accept your limitations. Not everyone can be a CEO or a major investor. Your mother and I are proud that you've maintained steady employment. That's enough. I pressed send. I appreciate that, Dad, I said. You've always been clear about where I stand. My phone buzzed immediately. David's response was instantaneous. Confirmed. Liquidation initiated. Board will be notified within 30 minutes per SEC requirements. Documents being prepared. Call when you're ready to discuss reallocation. The reception continued around us. Shareholders mingled, discussing the expansion plans, celebrating the company's trajectory. Morrison Industries had grown 340% over the past 8 years, something my family attributed to Dad's leadership and Victoria's strategic vision. They never wondered why the company always seemed to have capital available exactly when it was needed. They never questioned where the crucial Series C funding had come from 6 years ago. They never asked who'd provided the bridge financing that saved them from bankruptcy during the 2020 supply chain crisis. I'd been their safety net for 8 years, quietly ensuring the family business survived and thrived while they mocked my warehouse job. The job I'd kept as cover, working 3 days a week to maintain appearances while managing a $400 million investment portfolio from my laptop. Marcus approached with 2 other board members, both men in their 60s who'd served on the Morrison board for decades. Jason, you remember Gerald and Thomas? Marcus said, his tone making it clear he expected me to excuse myself. Of course, I said politely. How are the Q3 projections looking, gentlemen? Gerald smiled indulgently. Well, that's board-level discussion. But the company's in excellent shape. Your father and sister have built something remarkable. Indeed, I said. Though I imagine the expansion plans require significant capital restructuring? Thomas nodded. Very astute observation for someone not in the business. Yes, we're finalizing a $200 million capital raise. It's the largest in company history. Ambitious, I replied. I assume you've secured commitments from your major investors? Most of them, Gerald said. We have a few final confirmations pending, but the board is confident. We have very loyal shareholders. My phone buzzed again. David. First board notification sent. SEC filings submitted. This will hit internal systems in 15 minutes. Want me on standby? I typed back, standby confirmed. We'll call within the hour. The key, Marcus interjected, clearly wanting to demonstrate his business knowledge, is maintaining relationships with serious institutional investors. People who understand long-term value creation. Like your anchor investors? I asked casually. Exactly, Marcus said. Our top 5 shareholders control about 60% of the company. As long as they're committed, we're golden. I nodded. I was 3 of those 5 investors spread across different entities. Delta Holdings, $78 million. Epsilon Ventures, $69 million. Zeta Capital Partners, $56.7 million. Total, $203.7 million. Approximately 41% of Morrison Industries. Victoria joined the circle, her phone in hand. The board secretary just sent the expansion timeline. We'll finalize partnership commitments by end of week, then move to execution phase. Assuming no surprises, I said quietly. He gave me a pitying look. There won't be any surprises, Jason. This is how serious business works. You plan, you execute, you succeed. Maybe if you'd applied yourself in school instead of barely graduating, you'd understand. I'd graduated summa cum laude from MIT with a double major in computer science and finance. Online at night while working the warehouse job and building my first 3 companies. They'd never asked about my education beyond high school. Dad's phone rang. He glanced at the screen, frowning. "It's Robert from the board." "Excuse me." He stepped away and I watched his expression change from confident to confused to concerned in the span of 30 seconds. Victoria's phone buzzed. Then Marcus's. Then Gerald's and Thomas's. "What the hell?" Marcus muttered, staring at his screen. Victoria's face had gone pale. "There must be a mistake. This is... No, this can't be right." Dad returned, his face ashen. "We need an emergency board meeting. No. Everyone to the conference room." The reception dissolved into chaos as board members rushed back to the conference room. I followed slowly, laptop tucked under my arm, watching the panic spread like wildfire. Inside the conference room, Dad stood at the head of the table, Robert, the board chairman, beside him with a tablet displaying what I knew were SEC filings. "We have a situation," Robert announced, his voice tight. "I've just received notification that 3 of our largest shareholders are liquidating their entire positions. Effective immediately." Victoria grabbed the tablet. "Delta Holdings, Epsilon Ventures and Zeta Capital Partners. That's over $200 million. That's 41% of the company." "Who are they?" Marcus demanded. "Why wasn't I informed we had this level of concentration risk?" "They've been with us for years," Robert said. "Different investment vehicles, all managed through Sterling Capital Management. We've never had direct contact with the beneficial owners. They've been completely passive investors until now." Gerald looked like he might be sick. "This kills the expansion. If our anchor investors are pulling out, no one else will commit capital. We'll be lucky if this doesn't trigger a complete collapse in our stock price." "There has to be an explanation," Dad insisted. "Get Sterling Capital on the phone. Now." Victoria was already dialing. The call connected on speaker. "Sterling Capital Management, this is David Chen." "Mr. Chen, this is Victoria Morrison from Morrison Industries. We need an immediate explanation for the liquidation notices we just received." "Ms. Morrison," David's voice was professionally neutral. "I'm not at liberty to discuss the specifics, but I can confirm that our client has initiated a complete withdrawal from all Morrison Industries positions." "Your client?" Dad interjected. "We need to speak with them directly. This is catastrophic for our company." "I can pass along a message," David offered. "But I should mention that my client is actually present with you right now." The room went silent. Victoria's eyes swept the assembled board members. "What are you talking about? Who is your client?" "Jason Morrison," David said calmly. "Would you like me to email the authentication documents to the board, Jason? Or would you prefer to handle this yourself?" Every eye in the room turned to me. I opened my laptop, pulled up my Sterling Capital dashboard and connected it to the conference room display. The screen filled with my portfolio overview. Sterling Capital Management Client Dashboard Account Holder. Jason R. Morrison. Total Assets Under Management. $487,234,877. Recent Transaction. Morrison Industries, Complete Liquidation. Delta Holdings LLC, $78 million. Epsilon Ventures LP, $69 million. Zeta Capital Partners, $56,700,000 total withdrawal. $203,700,000 status. Processing. The silence was absolute. "That's..." Victoria's voice trailed off. "That's not possible." I pulled up the entity documents, showing the registration papers for each investment vehicle. All incorporated 8 years ago. All listing Jason R. Morrison as beneficial owner. All with complete transaction histories showing my initial investments and subsequent growth. "I was 21 when I started," I said quietly. "I just sold my first company, a supply chain optimization platform I built in my dorm room. $12 million exit. I invested $8 million of it into Morrison Industries when Dad was looking for Series C funding." Marcus was shaking his head. You had $12 million at 21? "First company," I corrected. "The second one, a logistics AI startup. Exited for $43 million when I was 24. I put another $70 million into Morrison through Epsilon Ventures. Then cryptocurrency gains in 2017 let me add another $60 million through Zeta Capital. Dad had sunk into his chair. You've been our largest investor for 8 years? Yes, I said. I've also been the one providing bridge financing during cash flow crises, backing your credit lines, and quietly buying shares when other investors wanted to dump during market downturns. I've kept this company solvent for nearly a decade. Victoria was scrolling through the documents on the display, her face growing paler with each page. The Series C funding that saved us in 2017. That was you. Delta Holdings. The emergency capital during the 2020 supply chain crisis? Epsilon Ventures. The growth financing last year that let us acquire Peterson Manufacturing? Zeta Capital. I pulled up another document. My personal transaction history. I've invested $203.7 million into Morrison Industries over 8 years. Current market value when I initiated withdrawal, same amount. I've provided patient capital, never asked for board representation, never interfered with operations. I've been the silent partner you always needed but never knew you had. Robert was staring at the documents. Why? Why stay anonymous? Why not take your seat on the board? Because I wanted to see if they'd ever treat me differently, I said, gesturing to my family. If they'd ever see past the warehouse worker and recognize competence. 8 years. 8 years of listening to lectures about getting a real job, about understanding my limitations, about accepting that I'm not cut out for serious business. Dad's voice was barely a whisper. Jason, we didn't know. You never asked, I said simply. At Thanksgiving 3 years ago, Dad, you told me I'd never understand what it takes to build a real company. I'd just restructured $50 million in debt to keep Morrison Industries from defaulting on its credit facilities. Victoria's hands were shaking. The expansion plans, without this capital, will fail, I finished. You'll lose your anchor investors, because I am your anchor investors. The other institutional investors will see 41% of the company liquidating and assume the worst. Your stock price will crater. The expansion will be cancelled. You might survive, but you'll spend the next 5 years rebuilding credibility. Marcus finally found his voice. You can't do this. You'll destroy everything Dad built. I'm doing exactly what you told me to do, I replied calmly. I'm being realistic about my capabilities. I'm focusing on my strengths. And apparently, my strength isn't being part of this family's business. My phone rang. Davidson. Jason, he said, his voice on speaker for the room to hear. Liquidation is processing smoothly. I've also received inquiries from 3 competing firms who got wind of your Morrison exit. They're interested in investing your capital in their expansions. Shall I take meetings? Yes, I said, watching my father's face. Schedule meetings with all 3. Focus on companies with competent leadership that values all their stakeholders. Understood. Also, the tech startup you've been evaluating, the renewable energy logistics platform, they've accepted your term sheet. $30 million for 20% equity. Want me to proceed? Proceed, I confirmed. Send the contracts. I ended the call. Dad stood slowly. Jason, please. Let's discuss this rationally. You're upset and you have every right to be. But destroying the company isn't the answer. I'm not upset, I said truthfully. And I'm not destroying anything. I'm simply withdrawing my investment from a company whose leadership told me, repeatedly and explicitly, that I don't belong there. You were very clear at today's meeting. You need serious investors. People who understand what it takes. I'm taking my $203.7 million and investing it somewhere my contribution will be valued. Victoria's voice cracked. Jason, we're family. Family business is only for real family, I quoted. Those were Uncle Robert's exact words at Christmas 2 years ago, and every one of you agreed. Marcus told me at last year's shareholder meeting that I should focus on getting promoted to supervisor. You told me 3 months ago that partnership positions require $50 million minimum business acumen and track record, and that I have none of those things. I pulled up one final document. My complete investment history. I have $487 million in assets. I've founded and exited 4 companies. I've provided patient capital to 17 startups, 12 of which are now valued at over $100 million each. I have business degrees from MIT that I earned while you assumed I'd barely graduated high school. And I've spent 8 years being treated like the family failure while secretly keeping your business alive. The board members were staring at the display, at the undeniable evidence of everything I'd built while being dismissed as a warehouse worker. Robert cleared his throat. Jason, on behalf of the board, I apologize. We failed in our due diligence. If you'd just told us. Why should I have to tell you? I asked. Why is the burden on me to prove my worth? Why wasn't it enough that I showed up, that I participated, that I asked intelligent questions? Why did I have to reveal a 9-figure portfolio to be taken seriously? No one had an answer. Gerald spoke up, his voice hesitant. Is there any way to reverse this decision? I closed my laptop. The SEC filings are submitted. The liquidation is processing. Sterling Capital is already reallocating my portfolio. It's done. But the money hasn't transferred yet, Marcus said desperately. Technically you could still. Could I? I interrupted. Could I really? Let me understand. 3 hours ago you told me I was too poor for partnership. You said I should get a real job. You implied I was embarrassing myself by attending shareholder meetings. Now that you know I control 41% of your company, suddenly I'm worth listening to. Victoria was crying silently. Dad looked like he'd aged 10 years in 10 minutes. I'll make you a deal, I said. I'll consider reversing the liquidation under one condition. Everyone leaned forward. Apologize, I said. Not to me. To every employee at Morrison Industries who's been dismissed, overlooked, or underestimated because of their job title, their background, or their appearance. Issue a company-wide memo acknowledging that competence and contribution matter more than pedigree. Implement blind resume reviews for all positions. Create actual pathways for warehouse workers to advance into management if they demonstrate capability. Dad nodded eagerly. Done. We can do all of that. Right away. And, I continued, I want you to understand that I'm not doing this out of spite. I'm doing this because you've demonstrated that you evaluate people based on their surface credentials rather than their actual contributions. That's not just bad for me, it's bad business. How many talented people have you overlooked because they didn't have the right degree, the right connections, or the right last name? Robert was making notes. We'll implement everything you've suggested. Immediately. I shook my head slowly. You're missing the point. I don't want you to change because I'm threatening your business. I want you to change because it's the right thing to do. But you can't, can you? You'll implement these policies to save the company, but the moment the crisis passes, you'll go back to judging people by their resumes rather than their results. That's not fair, Victoria protested. We're trying to make this right. Are you? I asked. Or are you trying to save your expansion plans? My phone buzzed with an alert. The first tranche of liquidated assets had cleared. $68 million deposited to my Sterling Capital operating account. The money's moving, I said. First wave just cleared. The rest will follow over the next 48 hours. Dad stood reaching for my arm. Son, please. Give us a chance. We made mistakes, horrible mistakes. But we're your family. I looked at his hand on my arm. The same hand that had patted my shoulder condescendingly 1,000 times while telling me to accept my limitations. You're right, I said quietly. You are my family. Which is why this hurts. Which is why I spent 8 years hoping you'd see me differently. Which is why I kept coming to these meetings even when Marcus told me I was embarrassing myself. I gently removed his hand. But I'm done hoping. I'm done waiting for you to value me. I'm taking my $203.7 million and investing it in people who recognize talent regardless of where it comes from. Another alert. $45 million cleared. The board members were frantically conferring, their voices rising in panic. The expansion was dead. The stock price would crater when the market opened tomorrow. Years of growth wiped out. Victoria grabbed my laptop before I could stop her, staring at the Sterling Capital dashboard with wild eyes. There has to be something. Some way to fix this. I took the laptop back. There was 8 years of opportunities to fix this. Every time you dismissed me, every time you told me to get a real job, every time you implied I wasn't smart enough or serious enough or worthy enough. Those were opportunities. You chose not to take them. Marcus stood abruptly. This is blackmail. You're holding the company hostage over hurt feelings. No, I corrected. I'm removing my investment from a company that explicitly told me I don't belong there. That's not blackmail. That's respecting your clearly stated preferences. My phone rang again. David Chen. Jason, I need confirmation on the renewable energy logistics startup. They want to move quickly and I have 2 other VCs competing for the deal. Do you want to increase your position to $50 million for 30% equity? I looked at my family. Dad slumped in his chair, Victoria crying, Marcus seething, and the board members desperately trying to calculate if the company could survive losing 41% of its capital base. Increase to $75 million for 35%, I said. Send me the terms. Done, David confirmed. Also, should I proceed with meetings at the competing manufacturing firms? They're very eager to discuss investment. Schedule them for next week, I said. And David? See if any of them have employee advancement programs. I'm interested in companies that promote from within. I ended the call. $89 million cleared. Only $115.7 million remaining in Morrison Industries holdings, and it would all be gone by tomorrow. Robert made one final attempt. Jason, as board chairman, I'm formally requesting an emergency meeting to discuss restoring your investment position. We can offer you 3 board seats, VP title, whatever you need. I don't need anything, I said simply. I needed you to respect me 8 years ago. I needed you to value contribution over credentials. I needed my family to believe in me before they knew I had $487 million. But I don't need that anymore. I've built my success without your acknowledgement, and I'll continue building it without your approval. I packed up my laptop. The warehouse needs reliable people, right, Dad? There's no shame in that. So I'll finish out my last 2 weeks there and then I'm moving to Silicon Valley. I have 17 portfolio companies that actually value my input. Dad's voice was broken. Jason, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I know, I said. And I did. I could see the genuine remorse in his eyes, the devastating realization of what he'd thrown away through years of casual dismissal. But it was too late. $112 million cleared. Victoria stood blocking the door. Please. Just tell us what you want. Anything. I wanted you to see me, I said quietly. That's all I ever wanted. To be seen as competent, valuable, worthy of respect. Not because of my portfolio but because of who I am and what I contribute. I stepped past her toward the door. But you couldn't do that, I continued. And now you're offering me board seats and titles and respect because you've seen my bank balance. Which proves you never really saw me at all. The final alert. $203.7 million completely liquidated from Morrison Industries. Assets transferred to Sterling Capital operating account. I turned back one last time. Good luck with the expansion. I genuinely hope you find investors who fit your definition of serious money. But those investors won't love this company the way I did. They won't protect it during crises. They won't provide patient capital when times are tough. They'll want returns, board control, and quarterly performance. You gave us all of that without asking for anything, Robert said quietly. Why? Because it was my family's business, I said. Because I believed in what Dad built. Because I hoped that someday, you'd all realize that the kid in the warehouse was paying attention, learning, and building something remarkable. I opened the conference room door. But I was wrong. You'll never see past the surface. So I'm taking my $203.7 million and finding people who will. I walked out. Behind me I heard the chaos erupt. Board members shouting, Victoria sobbing, Dad's voice calling my name. I didn't look back. My phone buzzed one final time. David Chen, full liquidation complete. $203.7 million transferred. Where do you want me to reallocate? I stepped into the elevator, watching the conference room door close behind me. Find me companies run by people who started in warehouses, I typed. Who worked their way up. Who value contribution over credentials. I'm done investing in businesses that judge people by their resumes. Understood, David replied. I know at least 5 companies that fit that profile. Scheduling calls. The elevator descended. By the time I reached the ground floor, My phone was filling with meeting requests, investment opportunities, and messages from portfolio company founders congratulating me on the Morrison exit. None of them asked about my warehouse job. None of them questioned my competence. None of them needed to see my bank balance to know I was worth listening to. They saw me. And that, finally, was enough. I walked out of Morrison Industries headquarters for the last time, leaving behind $203.7 million in liquidated investments and 8 years of being underestimated. My family would survive. The company would limp along, smaller and humbler. They'd learn hard lessons about judging people by their surface credentials. But I was done teaching those lessons. I had 17 portfolio companies to nurture for new startups to evaluate, and an entire career ahead of me surrounded by people who recognized talent when they saw it, regardless of where it came from. The warehouse worker had built an empire. And nobody in that conference room had noticed until it was too late.